All right, so thanks so much for showing up tonight. I would love to open our discussion and talking about negative thoughts. And I know I can tell by the facial expressions, people were like, you said you were excited about this topic, but I am excited about this topic because I'd like to start the conversation by just kind of taking a pause. And I would like for each of you to reflect on whether or not your default thoughts are more positive or more negative about yourself. So, thoughts specifically about yourself, do they tend to be more positive or more negative? Now, I'm going to let that sit for a minute because the follow up to that then is we have to define what is a positive thought and what's a negative thought, right? Sometimes things that can feel uncomfortable or what we might be inclined to describe as negative are not actually what would be considered negative thoughts. So I'd like to consider a definition of a negative thought being a thought about the self that does not lead to a desired outcome, and it is a sense of self-sabotage. So the thoughts that we might have about ourselves that tend to hold us back from getting what we want in our life. So then a positive thought can be constructive. It might not feel really comfortable at the moment, it can be a constructive thought, but it moves you towards a goal or a chosen outcome or something that promotes change. So, and one analogy might be running a race. Let's say you train for a race. For those crazy people out there that like to run races. I did that in high school. And so I then, once my knees started hurting, was like, no more of that. Body says no. But I remember very clearly that training, what any sport or any activity that you're doing. But let's use a race. If you're training for a race, you go run the race and the race does not go the way that you thought that it was going to, and it doesn't go the way that your training took you, and you feel kind of defeated or disappointed at the end of the race. Positive self-talk about that race can be, okay, I did the training. What could I have done differently? Was it my diet? Was it the place that I went to train? Was it my running partner? Was it my shoes? What are some of the things I can look at to say, here are some really specific things I can do differently that will potentially lead me to a different outcome during the next race? Whereas negative thought would say, man, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I even thought I could win that race. It doesn't matter what I do, nothing works out for me. I'll probably never win anything. I should probably stop running. I'm just not good at stuff. My mom or dad told me I was never any good, and I probably should just listen to them and not go forward with this, right? Just to throw some mommy daddy drama in there. That would be negative thinking. That's not going to get you prepared for the next race. That's going to hold you back and keep you from potentially achieving the original goal that you had set for yourself. So that's an easy one to use because we can look at that competition, but how often in life do we do those same things? Oh, I didn't get the promotion I thought I was going to get. I should probably just stop thinking that this job is ever going to go anywhere. I'm always going to be overlooked. Maybe I should take a public speaking course. That could potentially be helpful, right? Maybe I should take a public speaking course if that's something that would be enhancing to the job that you're doing. But if it's, I need to go do more things because I'm never going to get what I want, it can also be very distracting. Maybe if I try this or try that, but not really measuring how am I going to use this in a way that's going to get me what I want. So when we think about what is a positive thought and what is a negative thought, the big differentiator is which part is self-sabotaging and which part is actually constructive to move you in the direction you want for your life. So if we use those definitions, I'll go back to the original question. Are more of your thoughts about yourself positive and moving you in the direction you want, or negative and potentially self-sabotaging or holding you back or providing excuses for why things keep going the way that they do. Well, everyone's against me. Every time something good happens, something bad happens. I just feel like the universe is against me. That's always a big one. Like how many billions of people there are on this planet, and yet the entire universe is against me. That's a pretty egocentric statement. But it can feel that way when we are sitting around thinking about things and basing them on our feelings. That's a pretty common concept we come to a lot in group is talking about with thought itself and with microdosing. How often are we looking at things based on how we feel versus based on what we notice and how our perspective is shifting and what we're really giving intentional thought to? So let's take that concept and move forward with if we weren't having negative thoughts about ourselves, would we still then have negative thoughts about other people? It'd be a lot less likely because we are our first reference point. It's impossible to say, oh, I don't judge any other people, I only judge myself. Well, where do you hold the judgment scale? What are you referencing in that judgment point? If you're judging yourself, you are automatically referencing other people or vice versa. And where do those ideas of judgment and reference even come from? They come from the experiences we've had, the culture that we're in, the belief systems we've been raised in, the ideas that tumble around in our brain, that rigid default mode network and way of thinking that we have established. That's where all those definitions come from to even have a reference of ourself or someone else and to have it be positive or negative. So if we take this idea of negative self-talk and the amount of time that we spend reflecting on why we suck and why we don't deserve to get the things that we want and why relationships continue going in the way that they have and I'm probably never going to have the relationship I want or be the parent that I want or have the job or the promotion or the bank account or on and on and on, the body, the style, right? All the things that we have been told, hey, here's how you measure success. Here's how you know that your life has purpose and that you've made it. All those definition reference points that we decide we're not worthy of or we're not going to have, that's what we tend to default and hold on to. Yet if you ask a 2-year-old, can they get what they want in life? They're like, yeah, I already am everything I want. Aren't you glad you get to be in my presence? It's basically how that little 2-year-old feels and responds to the world. They don't know that they don't have all the things to be successful. They don't know that they're supposed to have a smaller waist or bigger muscles or a nose that looks just so or a bank account that looks a certain way, right? They just show up in the natural state to exist on the planet, and to be here and to interact with others. They don't know that they're being judged for everything that they do because they are not judging themselves until they're taught to do that. And once it starts, how do we turn that off? Because that becomes the brain's way of processing information, it becomes the new expectation. The brain, in its efficiency, will always go down the path of least resistance. That's the most efficient. But every single thought that we have requires a brainwave, and every single brainwave requires energy. So we are spending a lot of our energy thinking about how terrible we are and how we'll never really get what we want, unless we choose to change that. And the fact that we are not born thinking that way, we learn it, means we can unlearn it. And we can choose to think differently and to do something differently and to respond differently. Well, we've got to get the brain on board with that desire in a structural way, and that's what psilocybin helps us to do. Psilocybin quiets down that default way of thinking, quiets down that rigid thinking, enhances neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to have new neural connections and to respond in a different way and to learn new things. Reduces that blood flow to the amygdala so we're not in fight or flight and fear, because fear is such a massive underlier of negative thought. And so using psilocybin in its natural form in microdose amounts allows us to show up in our lives in a more natural way, less modified, less negative, less angry, less based on how we feel at the moment. And that's a pretty cool thought. The fact that we can choose to think differently brings all the power back to you to choose how you want to show up every day. So I'd love to hear thoughts from the group. What's coming to mind for you in talking about negative thinking and having the ability to be able to shift that and show up differently?
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I have my headset on. Yeah, that was really interesting to hear about the amygdala, because I didn't know that specific fact about reducing fear directly, and fight or flight. That makes a lot of sense to me because I definitely felt a drawdown or a reduction in that. I think it helped me make better decisions, recognize opportunities. I think I had a lot of irrational anxiety and fear. Part of it was seasonal, and part of it was just there all the time, maybe to a lesser degree. Um, no, so that's been really good. As far as negative thoughts, I feel like it's been more for me, um, like still worried I'm not going to make the right decision because there's so many. I see so much more. There's so many opportunities. There's so much more happening because I can see it and because I'm not afraid of it and because I believe that it is possible that I could. There's so much more you could do. I could do, and it's just but I still I still struggle to actually make the decision. And then some of that doubt of just that am I making the right decision? But I wouldn't go back to not seeing it and not right or being afraid of it or being locked in a room because I have this irrational anxiety. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. And I'd love to capitalize real quick just on that idea of irrational thought because I hear that terminology a lot. And this is how I interpret that. And if you interpret it differently, then let me know. But when we use that term irrational thought, that means that we can look at the concept and recognize that there doesn't need to be fear based in that, but it still feels heavy. And that's where that would be kind of my description of that irrational thought that I can see it. This isn't something that I think I should be afraid of, but it still feels fearful or feels heavy. And if we really look at where does that come from, it came from somewhere. So it's not completely irrational. Sometimes that concept, especially within a clinical context, we use the term, oh, it's an irrational fear, an irrational thought, and you can feel kind of dumb in saying that. Like, I know I shouldn't be afraid of this, but I am. Like, don't tell anybody and don't write that in your notes, you know? But it came from somewhere. So it's not really irrational. It's just recognizing that the thought is presenting itself and it's from a past experience that was fearful or an idea that has been given to us that is rooted in some sort of fear or understanding or definition that again would be based in fear. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that visceral response to it. But really going deeper, like you're saying, Matthew, and being able to recognize what is that and why is it there, and then what do I want to do with it? So it's not, gosh, I'm so weak. I can't believe this stupid thing is still doing this. Because what's that? That's negative talk. That's negative thinking. I'm stupid. I'm weak. This is still has power over me. I'm probably not going to be able to escape it. It's kind of, if we go down the trail versus, okay, this thing keeps coming up. When I'm in this situation, this fear is still there. It's still rooted in something. Where is it rooted? What can I connect that to? What's my reference point for that fear so that I can face it head on and go through it, and then I'll have to be afraid of it anymore. So it's not really irrational. It's completely rational because it came from somewhere. But objectively, we recognize this shouldn't have as much power in my life as I'm allowing it to have. That would be my interpretation. Your thoughts on that, Matthew?
Yeah, I could see that. Like I said, that it was rational in some context in the past, and even though the context doesn't necessarily apply to my present right now, I'm bringing it forward. There's some trigger or tie or connection there. Um, I could definitely see that, or hearing or being taught it from somebody that I trusted or that was parental or in authority or had that yeah, had that connection.
Yeah. So that PTSD is an example of that. We use the diagnosis post-traumatic stress disorder. Even if it's not a disorder, we can use post-traumatic stress. And what is that? It's an emotional response. It's the body responding to something that in was a reflection or attached to fear at one point in time, or to something life-threatening, which of course then would be fearful at one point in time. And now we're not in that environment anymore, but there's still these triggers that are bringing that same visceral response, and we're responding to it the same way as if we are still in that same moment. So again, the brain used that recognition of, hey, this is fearful, this is potentially harmful to you, so you need to respond in a certain way to self-protect, and that protected you at one point, but now it's not serving anymore. Now it's doing what? It's holding us back. It's more of that self-sabotage. So that's where that concept of, oh, well, this is irrational. I'm not at war, or, I'm not with the person that hurt me previously, or this isn't life-threatening in this particular moment, but I'm responding as if it's life-threatening. Okay, well, congratulations on having a really healthy brain that wants to keep you alive. However, it's telling you now that something is life-threatening when it's not. Let's shift that. Recognize that it's there and where it came from. But that is so closely connected to negative self-talk. That is a huge piece of why often individuals who have PTSD will also exhibit symptomology of treatment-resistant depression, because it is that negative thought loop that just goes around and around and around that's really hard to break out of. So as we start talking about where these diagnoses came from, which everyone on here tonight knows, I'm not a huge fan of these diagnoses labels, because it just puts a label on something that we've given a definition to. But if we look at the symptoms, what is showing up that's holding us back from getting what we want out of our life? Traumatic things can happen, scary things can happen. We all have our own stories and things that we've been through, but how do we move through those experiences to still go forward and have the life that we want and not let those be self-limiting? Other thoughts? I'm going to assume y'all are just in deep introspection tonight. What comes to mind then with the recognition that a lot of this self-sabotaging, limiting ideas that we hold on to came from our environment and are learned? How do we unlearn those? What are some of the ways that we start working through that and healing some of those?
I'm here for that answer, Charity. So
You go right ahead.
no, I'm here to find that out.
Oh,
I was
you're here
like,
to
that's
find the
exactly what
answer.
we want to know.
Okay. Well, I'd love to
Uh,
hear thoughts from others. Erica.
So I like had this thought the other day. So I practice Buddhism. So and I'm studying to become a Buddhist minister, I guess. Um, so so with microdosing and doing it at the same time, I've had some very, very deep thoughts recently. Um, I'm just gonna try to think of how to say this concisely. It might not come out concisely. So like fear of judgment. I never really felt like I really lived in fear of judgment of others. But then realizing like, oh yes, I have. And I realized, okay, so let me back. So like let's take like an actor on a stage at a theater. If the actor does something that in or like the character does something people don't like and they boo, the actor's feelings are not hurt because they recognize that the people are booing at the character that they're seeing on stage, not their true nature. And realizing that like judgment, it's like from anybody, it's just the character they're perceiving, not my true nature, not anyone else's true nature. Um, and that like creating that separation of self. I'm trying to say this like, I don't know. Does that make sense to you guys? I don't know if that was like too heady, but I was like going on a walk the other day and I was thinking about that. And um, I was like, so there's no reason to ever be offended. Just like you wouldn't be offended if you were in a play on a stage and people were booing your character for doing something because nobody can know what's truly in there. So if your parents tell you that you suck and you grew up that way, they're not actually speaking about your true nature. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other components probably there, but um, just the facade is the illusion of what they see you to be. But we get attached to our illusion. The actor gets confused and believes they're the character, and you're not. So
Yeah. No, the only way, again, that someone is able to judge you is through their perspective of themselves and through the filters and the definitions and the information that they have. And that doesn't have to be anything that you take on whatsoever. Actually, I really like that analogy of being the actor on the stage and individuals judging the character, but it's the character, it's the facade, it's the mask that we put on. It's not actually our true self. But to be able to have that separation, there has to be a recognition for each individual that of what their true self is. And that a lot of what we portray as we go out about in society is a mask to some degree. Right or wrong, good or bad, helpful or harmful, that's just a lot of what gets put on when we go out because without really knowing yourself or the idea of yourself or the entity of self and what your goals are and what you want out of your life, then what happens? We're just tossed around by society. And then we do become the character in the play. We are the cog in the wheel. We're just in society doing whatever we think society wants us to be doing for that basic underlying piece of survival. But we're always measuring ourselves against that approval aspect. And that closest approval, to your point, Erica, it starts with parents or guardians at the time that we're a child. And that's where a lot of that idea of self is ingrained and taught and learned. And that's what we tend to take on, because that's what a child has no idea of self until we give it to them. They're just showing up, experiencing, interacting in the world. Then we say, oh no, you're good, or you're bad, or this was good, or this was helpful, or we respond in anger or punishment. And that's what continues. And so we're consistently measuring the value that we believe about ourselves by how other people are responding to us, but they can only respond to us in a way that they actually think about themselves. So all the negative self-talk that we have has been like a big, disgusting gift that other people have given us. And instead of looking at it and saying, no thanks, I'm going to hold out for the bright red paper with a shiny gold bow on top, because that's what I think about me. You can take your dirty newspaper with, the old shoestring tied around it and go toss that in the river. Well, don't do that. That's polluting. But, put it back under the stairs, hide it away. I don't need to take that. But instead, we take all that dirty newspaper and all the old junk and all the old information that other people feel about themselves, and we put it into us and start to believe that that's who we are and that's the value that we have. And if we never stop to think about what we want for our life, what kind of environment we want to exist in, how we want to show up for other people, how we respond to nature. Are we connected to nature? Does that negative self-talk and that reflection against culture make us more connected to nature? Or does it separate us? Because often it separates us. What do we end up doing? We end up deciding, I need to only make more money. I need to only be able to achieve these certain things. I need to only be able to look this certain way. There's nothing wrong with money, nothing wrong with titles, nothing wrong with alphabet soup after your name, nothing wrong with looking a certain way. But if that is the sole source of identity, it is a black hole. It will never be filled because it's not yours. It's somebody else's. Quieting down that negative self-talk, being able to set that aside, recognize it. Is this sabotaging to me or is this helpful to me? There is a difference, like we talked about earlier.
So that's the answer to your question about how do we do that. Over the past couple of years, that's exactly how I've started doing that. Are you able to hear me? Because I have it on speaker.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
With the assistance of the psilocybin and the quieting down of that negative self, I've gotten the opportunity to figure out myself, maybe for the very first time in my entire life. I know that we weren't born with all these thoughts, but as soon as you hit the ground, they're going to start flooding in. And like you said, once it starts, you can't just stop it. And so I felt exactly that. And then as a people pleaser, and I know you don't like labels, but that's, to best explain how I lived the majority of my life. I picked up and I presented myself just like the actor, and that's who I was. So I didn't really have identity of self. I didn't, that's who I was. I was who everyone else, I thought they wanted me to be. And so I was very, very, very confused. And then with the negative thoughts, it was flooding in because if I could not make them happy or could not get a certain result, then I felt like a failure. And so with the quieting down, that's exactly how I'm doing it, and it's a process. And so um, I can finally hear like my true self. You know what I mean? Like before I couldn't. So with the psilocybin and the quieting of those that negative, I kind of am figuring out who I am for the first time, and I'm 43 years old. And so, but it feels good. And like I'm not kidding you. So your definition of positive and negative, I wouldn't have gone there, but it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. And I do not use this word, but sometimes when I'm, like right after I take psilocybin, there's like this, the tone of voice that I speak to myself in is super nice. And I told Lloyd once, that's thing I'm under right now. My husband, he's right here with me. But they said darling, like it was like darling. I've never used that word in my life. Like, like I'm sure I've used it, but darling, it just speaking so much nicer. And I told him, I'm like, I don't know who that was because that was not me. I did not say darling, but a complete shift. Like you said, the majority of the time it's negative. It's not productive. It's not. And I was just like kind of flabbergasted. I'm like, holy cow, like a lot nicer, a lot nicer. And so like even the tone, and like you said, because it could be something that seems negative, but it's not really negative if it's going to help you, get you to where you want to be. And so I'm just figuring this all out, and it's just like, okay, I got a great, amount of work to do before I'm to where I want to be. But man, like I can also see how far I've come.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so that was a long-winded explanation, but that's exactly how I'm doing it, is just quieting that negative voice down day by day. And then yeah, this is the other thing I was going to say, is that the learned experiences. So pretty much with the assistance of psilocybin, I'm living life, right? So 2 years have gone on with it, and I'm seeing, well, I don't have to be fearful because I've gotten through this, and this. Whereas beforehand, I was fearful because I just thought this could happen. But now I'm experiencing all these new things, and I'm not dying, and my husband's not leaving me, and I'm not like, all these like worst case scenarios are not happening. So also I'm like, I guess I'm realizing that like I'm starting to feel a bit safer. And so the fears are slowly dissipating because, that negative voice is quieted down. So I know that might not, that's exact. So pretty much just experience the time with it, giving it more time so that I can have these experiences and realize like, okay, I didn't die. I'm not dying. I'm okay still, And so I think it's going to take time too. And that's why I was like, if you have any faster ways, then share them. But it's working. And so that's all I know. Okay, sorry guys.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, darling. I love that that was a word that you chose for yourself to in speaking to yourself, because it is a term of endearment, and that that terminology that we often use with ourselves tends to be so judgmental and harsh. And so the fact that you're recognizing how the tone towards yourself is shifting, that's really incredible. And I appreciate you acknowledging that. When I work with couples within relationships, that's one of the most common things I hear. Oh, it's their tone. It's not the words they say, but it's the tone that they're using. It sounded judgmental or it sounded condescending. And so recognition of that tone that we have with ourselves, being able to have more gentleness around it. And just like we would respond to a 2-year-old, they don't know all the things that we know, so we're not going to respond in harshness with something that they don't know and they haven't learned yet. But with ourselves, that's often where that goes. Oh, you're so stupid. You should know better. Well, should I? Or is this just a new experience? And is that even something that's a fair statement to say? One of the things that you mentioned, Nicole, is saying that you're not there yet as far as where you want to be. But if we dial that back a little bit, there's not really a final destination goal. There can be a desire to continue thinking more openly, continuing to be more gentle with ourselves, more positive, more gentle with the people around us, because that's what translates out there. If I can be gentle with me, I can be much more gentle with, the other people that I come in contact with. Um, but the goal is how you're showing up each day and in those moments and in the things that you want for your life. So you're moving towards something, but as we have that more defined goal of how we want to respond to ourselves, how we want to respond to others, what it is that we are moving toward in this life experience, then each moment is its own satisfactory life experience. I showed up today more content, more present, more open to the people around me, more gentle with myself, more patient with others. We have a reference point now that has been revised from what it used to be, which was just self-protect. Keep the mask on. We can take the mask off and show ourselves. I was watching a show recently where a family was living life in kind of how it would have looked in the 1800s. And so the whole family had to change their clothing, their hairstyle, no makeup for any of the women, no comforts of 21st century, and go and live on the prairie in a cabin just like life would have looked back in the 1800s. And one of the participants in the show was crying as she was taking her makeup off and recognizing and sharing with on screen how much this makeup is something that she puts on every day to hide herself. And she hadn't really noticed that she was using it that way. And it felt very vulnerable to know that she wasn't going to be able to put makeup on every day. And it's been interesting to watch kind of her transition through the series of this particular television show and how she's showing up and things that she's recognizing about herself that are really surprising. But all of us do that in certain ways because that's our modified way of thinking. Again, little 2-year-old perfect girl doesn't think she needs any makeup. She only puts makeup on because mommy puts makeup on and it's fun, and lipstick can also go on your eyes and on your cheeks and everywhere else because it's about coloring and beauty and fun. She doesn't know yet that, oh no, we have to do this a certain way because the way we just naturally are is not okay. Now, it's not a judge on makeup. Go ahead, Erica.
I was thinking that made me think of something. Have you guys seen the movie I Feel Pretty? Has anyone seen that? It has Amy Schumer. It's so good. Definitely put it on your watch list. So this actually made me think of this. This is like maybe about a month ago, because I've been out microdosing for few months. I said to my husband, I was like, okay, I know this is gonna sound really weird. I said, am I better looking recently? Like I was like, I know it sounds really funny, but like, have I gotten better looking? I don't, and I was because I had really been going through this like in my mind, like I was like thinking like, am I eating different? Like, is something going on?
Mhm.
And then I realized I was like, oh, maybe it's the mushrooms. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just I'm seeing myself differently than I normally do. And my husband's like, no, you look the same.
Oh, wrong answer. He had a
I was like, but then I was telling him, I was like, I know how crazy this sounds, but I think I've gotten better looking. And then him and I both seen the movie. Yeah, maybe. I Feel Pretty with Amy Schumer. So the concept of it, okay, yes, thank you, baby. The concept of is Amy Schumer hits her head. Do you know who Amy Schumer is, the comedian?
Yeah.
She's like, she's makes fun of being like a little chubby and stuff. So she hits her head and then she wakes up and she believes she's like this hot supermodel. So she starts behaving like a hot supermodel and then like life just starts kind of like aligning with that.
Mhm.
And then she like hits her head again and then she, you know, sees herself as before. And but the whole time she looked the same.
Right.
Because she showed up differently.
Yeah.
Everybody else responded to her differently. Like she got a job promotion, she got a boyfriend. It's just interesting because I was like thinking about that and I was like, how funny is that? That like maybe I was so critical.
Yeah.
I actually didn't even know what physically I looked like.
That kind
Yeah.
of reminds
As
me of the
fun as that
movie
sounds.
Shallow Hal.
It is,
Shallow
well,
Hal.
yeah. I feel Pretty's
Do you guys
basically,
remember that
it's like
movie?
I feel Pretty's basically a play on Shallow Hal. Yeah,
Okay.
except instead of seeing the girl, she sees herself. Yeah. You should definitely, it is such a good movie. Actually, I'm a therapist and I recommend it to a lot of clients to watch.
Mhm. And yeah, both of those go exactly with what we're talking about because it's an idea of thought. That's all it is. What is the messaging that we are telling ourselves or the messaging that we are telling to someone else, which those are going to be closely intertwined. But the messaging we tell ourselves directly impacts how we show up every day. So what I'm going to take away from what Erica said, though, for everybody listening, is that microdosing will make you more attractive to yourself. And therefore, you will show up differently in your life, thinking you're very attractive. So go with it. And if your spouse ever asks you if you are more attractive, always say yes, just as a side note, as a therapist. Um, but that is such a great reminder of how deep that belief system goes. Because that's the same thing we do in relationships. I'm only deserving of a relationship where somebody continues to treat me negatively because then I have to constantly be reinforced that I'm not good enough because that's what I believe about myself. And then when a healthy relationship presents itself, then an individual who has that belief system may sabotage that because they're waiting for there to be a fight. They're waiting to be cheated on. They're waiting to be treated like crap. They're waiting to be taken for granted. And when those things don't happen, it's very confusing. And so both parties in that relationship end up really confused. Well, what do you want from me? Well, I don't know. Well, I'm giving you everything. I know, stop doing that, basically. But that comes from inside of us. And we carry all of that into our interactions with other people, whether it is close relationships or person at the grocery store or how we drive in the morning or the afternoon, the way that we respond to our kids, the way we respond to the neighbor's kids, the way we treat the dog, all of this idea of what we believe about our place on this planet and what we bring to the experience that we live in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That's how we act. And if we learn it, we can change it. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change the way it perceives information, the belief systems that are held. The resetting of the default mode network is the resetting of that deeply ingrained belief system. And like Nicole was sharing, being able to see those benefits over time of looking back 2 years ago prior to microdosing and recognizing how mean you were to yourself and what a beautiful human you are, those two things just don't go hand in hand. But always feeling a need to prove is unhealthy. Go ahead, I saw you unmute.
I was just going to say, and I really am a beautiful human being. And so before it was black and white, pass or fail. But now there's different shades, and you know what I mean? And so it's colors. And so like what you said, Charity, about how from like where I am, and how far I want to be, like it literally goes with growing and healing. So exactly show up. It's not a pass or fail anymore. It's not succeed or failure. It's just, did I get something out of today? Was I who I wanted to be today? And that's not how I used to measure myself. So there's like, okay, I can work on this or that, but it's not a complete, like, I'm a failure anymore, like a complete shutdown. There's many different shades, and yeah, I do want to stay where I'm at and where I'm headed, but I don't condemn myself or just count myself out completely anymore. And that's beautiful. Life in shades and colors instead of black and white. That's priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly why it takes time. To your comment a little while ago about wanting to be able to kind of just snap your fingers and be there. If that were possible, that would have already happened. Because Lloyd's already told you you're beautiful. Other people have told you you're beautiful. But that belief system for yourself and for each of us and whatever it is that we have those negative self-talk issues within our own thoughts, It doesn't matter what someone else says because we automatically discount it. The change and the healing comes from learning it about ourselves, being willing to go through that and recognize where that messaging has come from so it can be changed. It's not something else that someone else can tell us. So kind of back to the idea of someone being on a stage, if somebody says, you know, you're the most amazing, beautiful thing I've ever seen, we can say, oh, that's just my character. That's just my mask. Just like if somebody says, you know, you're the stupidest, most ridiculous person I've ever seen, that's my character. That's my mask. Or is your character? And what's, you know, maybe you should check your glasses. And when we're able to do that in our everyday life, when somebody is critical, we have a chance to pause and say, okay, is that a criticism that maybe I should give some consideration to? Because that might be a way that I'm showing up that's not helpful to me. You know, when my spouse said to me, you're like a wasp, you just go around and sting everybody. I was like, well, you can go, you know what, because that's not true. But then I was like, maybe it is a little bit, right? My immediate response was self-protective. How dare you criticize me in some way? Instead of recognizing that his message was, you're being really sharp and pointy and you're pushing people away from you because you're so self-protective and trying to control the crap out of everybody and everything around you. Not helpful. Also, not the way I wanted to show up. But I didn't want to hear it that way because I didn't want to hear it at all because I was self-protecting. That was my mask that was on. So it's not that we always discount what people say, but we have a different filter about it. You know, we don't just say, oh, yeah, well, that's just who I am. It's just my personality. Take it or leave it. Because guess what? That does not serve us either. And why? Because that's not really how we want to show up. You can take it or leave it because it's too hard for me to do something different. I am used to showing up this way, so you're just going to need to accept it, or you can separate yourself and go somewhere else. Because that's our protective shell, that's our mask. So with psilocybin and being able to quiet down all that inner messaging, we have a better opportunity to be able to separate what is something that can be constructive and helpful and help us see ourselves differently, even when it's a little bit uncomfortable and not the way we really want to admit that maybe we're showing up. Or are we taking on negative messaging that's self-sabotaging and holding us back from the way that we want to show up in this world and the life that we want to have and the relationships and the experiences that we want to share? Because if we all walk around with a paper bag over our head so that nobody can see us so that we can't get hurt, we're just going to run into roadblocks. And what we see is going to be very narrow. When we're open to new perspective, we're open to other people, we're open to nature in a different way, then we have a chance of having what we want. And I use that phrase, but you have to determine what you want. What do you want for your life? Think about it. Give consideration to it. It is important. Because every decision that you make will reference back to, is this moving me in the direction that I want? You know, humans are the only species that have negative self-talk. I have yet to see a dog sit around and be able to look at them and go, wow, that dog really doesn't think anything about themselves. You know, they're just sitting there beating themselves up. No. Dog will get into the trash. Human comes home. The dog's like, oh crap, the human's home. I know they're going to be mad, but I'm just going to slink over there and wag my tail anyway because I'm so excited I just can't stand it because I'm a dog. And I don't think I did anything wrong. I just know they're going to be mad about it. But then what happens an hour later? Dog doesn't think anything else about it. Dog didn't think anything about it at the time. They just did what a dog does. They're like, you left pizza on the counter? That was dumb of you. I enjoyed the pizza. That was delicious. You don't see squirrels sitting in a tree wondering if they're okay, or dolphins swimming around the ocean, you know, wondering if somebody's going to mate with them this year, if they're just going to die off and become extinct. Or maybe they should just go swim into the infinite unknown and separate themselves from all the other whales. Humans do that. We are so intelligent that we put ourselves in a self-sabotaging box. Let's stop doing that. Let's be more open. Let's consider that we are beautiful, each of us in our own way. Even men, you're beautiful too, or you can be handsome, whichever.
I think that's why I like the idea of the psilocybin being uplifting, because I think humor is really disarming to those negative thoughts. Like if
Mhm.
you can laugh at yourself, or at least just kind of learn how to shake off the embarrassment better, or the feelings of inadequacy, or that you're just kind of not as good, or maybe you're unhappy with your weight or the way you look or how your teeth are or anything like that, or and maybe you feel a little slighted in life because you don't have the money to afford to fix your teeth, or you just, and maybe you can't buy all the organic foods that are really expensive, and so it's like it's easier to just be able to laugh about it and just kind of be like, well, I mean, I'm not as well off, but I can still eat better just by, kind of picking better things at the grocery store or buying the things that are on sale. And, you just have to learn how to work around it. But I think the humor part is so important. Just being able to laugh at yourself, laugh at your mistakes, but know that that's not your character, or that's not your being. That's just
Mhm.
a mistake, and it's something maybe you're working on, or and it is hard. I think the negative self-talk when you're in a situation at home or in a relationship where somebody is constantly putting you down, you do start to tell those things to yourself. You start to believe them, and I think that's the pattern that is good with breaking with the psilocybin. I think that's a great it's been a great motivator for me, at least in that sense.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is a great reminder of how humor can offset those aspects when we don't take ourselves quite so seriously. If we're not so focused all the time on what is everybody else thinking about me to reinforce the idea that I'm okay and I have value, then when something happens, we can just laugh it off because we know it doesn't define anything about us except that we're a human. And, I love just that phrase. It's a reminder. Something happens, the shipment goes out that's wrong, or, billing is messed up, or it's just, hey, thanks for being patient with all the humans in this company. Thanks for being patient with me. Thanks for giving me grace and not being perfect in the way that there's an expectation of showing up just like I want to do and we want to do for others. But that starts back to ourself first, being able to allow for that grace and that natural showing up that each of us have as human beings. There is no such thing as perfect anyway. It's just a word that we put out there that has an extremely ambiguous definition to it. Because to be imperfect would mean that there would have to be a mistake, and a mistake would have to have a definition of why that was wrong or bad or detrimental or whatever negative connotation we put to it. So we can't have perfection as a definition if we don't have all these definitions of everything else. And being able to set all of those aside allows us to have a lot more freedom in how we live. Of course, we want to interact within society and we want to be able to hold a job and to make money and pay bills and take care of the things that we want to take care of and survive with those natural needs on a daily basis and have healthy relationships. But it is not about some big ideological self-actualization objective because that's not even real. So that quieting of the mind, appreciating yourself, recognizing that just because something is right for another person doesn't mean it's right for me. You want to eat organic and buy all those certain foods and shop at those certain stores, and that's right for you, absolutely. I 100% support you in that. But if that's not my goal for me and not what's right for me, then I'm okay with our rights looking a little different. We can still both be right. Well, the hour always goes super quick, so thank you to all of you who shared, and even those of you that didn't share tonight. Appreciate you being here. For those of you listening through our podcast or online, if you would like to join our online groups and participate live at any point in time, please jump on the website, growyourownthoughts.org, and you will find dates, times, and Zoom links on there. And I will look forward to seeing you in group at some point.